for you.
I have to bow. Force of habit.
Hi, y'all. I'm Christa Wessel. I'm the early morning host at All Classical Portland. Hi. All Classical Portland, 24-hour, community-funded classical radio station, one of a kind, really, right here in our community. We all know about it, right? 89.9? Good. You'd be surprised how many people still don't. And so if you want to help us by spreading the word, that would be great. I am so grateful every time I get to do one of these pre-concert chats with a musician of the Oregon Symphony, because I feel like it really helps us feel connected to the people who are making this music for us. This fine young man is the third/utility trumpeter of the Oregon Symphony. His name is Doug Reneau.
Hi.
And young is not just a flattering word. You are young.
If 30 is young, then yes.
I think 30 is young, right? Yeah, everybody's nodding. 30 is young. But as we'll come to learn, he's kind of like an old soul in a young body. I like this guy a lot. Before we get to what you're doing here, can we talk about where you came from, maybe? You have only been here with the Oregon Symphony since...
January.
He's very new. You came from where?
Most recently from New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was the associate principal trumpet of the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra for about 5.5 years.
And that's in New Orleans?
Yes.
And before New Orleans?
Before New Orleans, I was in grad school at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana.
That's a top-notch school right there. Did you get your degree there?
No, in fact, Indiana University helped me achieve one of my childhood dreams, which was to win a job playing trumpet before I finished grad school. So, my kudos to Indiana University for that.
What a very strange goal.
It worked.
And so that was grad school. Before that?
Before that, I did my undergrad at the Kansas City Conservatory in Kansas City, Missouri.
So you're kind of a Midwesterner, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mostly grew up in Sioux City, Iowa. So it was just 4.5 hours down the road to go to college in Kansas City. And studied with a terrific trumpet teacher there named Keith Benjamin. And so from about 5th grade through high school, I was in Iowa. Before that, in the South, Florida and Tennessee.
Doug is a unique case. I mean, we have a lot of married couples in the symphony. Actually, not a lot, a handful. Doug has a relative in the symphony, too. It's his older brother.
That's right. My brother, Charlie, is the bass trombonist of the Oregon Symphony, and he's been here since 2007.
I know, isn't that sweet?
Yay, Charlie. All right.
And I did one of these pre-concert chats with Charlie Reneau. I think it's a couple of seasons ago now, but all of these pre-concert chats are archived at the All Classical Portland website. So if you want to compare brothers, you can go to allclassical.org and check it out.
I'm definitely going to win.
So there's no sibling rivalry here whatsoever.
Not at all.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, did you come from a musical family? Obviously, you and your brother are musical, but what's the background here?
We definitely came from a musical family. Both of our parents are professional, classically trained musicians. My mom is a singer and professor of voice at a small college in Sioux City, Iowa. And my father is the concertmaster of the Huntsville, Alabama Symphony. Excellent violinist. My mom's parents are both musicians. My aunt, my cousin used to be, I have a couple cousins who used to be musicians. Probably leaving some out, but
So
very musical family.
You had no choice but to become a musician, it sounds like.
Pretty much, yeah. And we weren't good at much else, so, you know.
Did your parents foist it upon you? Were you forced to take music lessons? Was it just assumed that you would? How did that go?
Forced, I think, would be the right word for our early piano lessons, because I'm not sure, I don't know about Charlie, but I didn't enjoy that when I was a kid. I took lessons on the piano from kindergarten through about 6th grade or so, and then they finally let me quit, and then I started playing violin for a year and a half. That didn't work out so good either. And then started playing trumpet in 6th grade. And that one seemed to stick.
Yeah.
So
Well, look at you now, yeah.
here I am.
So was Charlie playing trombone this whole time too?
He started on the trombone in 8th grade, and he's 3 years older than me. So he had a little head start on the brass instruments, but he also studied piano for many years as a kid.
And is this something you bonded over, you competed over? What was the dynamic there?
More bonding than competing, I'd say. Just being trumpet and trombone, we're not really in competition with each other. We grew up playing duets together. I often tell the story that warm summer days in Iowa, we would set up a music stand in the front yard and play duets for whoever would be walking by. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it was a lot. That was a lot of fun, and just having an older brother who was kind of leading the way and introducing me to new music all the time was tremendously beneficial.
Like new classical music, new rock and roll music, like what?
Not so much rock and roll. We were pretty nerdy as kids, mostly classical, and then a lot of jazz. We had really terrific jazz band and concert band and youth symphony programs in our town growing up. And jazz was a huge deal. For whatever reason, in Iowa, it seemed like the jazz championships that were held every year were even bigger than the football thing. We had a sign out front of our high school showing all the years that our high school jazz bands had won the jazz band championships. So we were very fortunate to have that. So Charlie would play new jazz CDs that he'd got, and I'd start listening to those and start trying to transcribe those.
Were you guys in the same bands and jazz bands and things in school together? I mean, is this kind of a familiar thing to you?
Sort of, yeah. The age difference is such that we only overlapped for 1 year in high school. So for that year, I guess we played in marching band together, but we also played in youth symphony together that year. And just this past spring, we played a brass quintet job together, and I think we determined that that's the first time we've ever played in a brass quintet together. Wow. So it took us both getting jobs in the Oregon Symphony to wind up playing in a brass quintet together, but we made it.
Yeah, it's not like you two followed each other all over the country. I mean, Charlie had his own path, you had your own path, and you kind of almost serendipitously collided here, right?
We're very fortunate. I feel very fortunate to have ended up here. The audition process for orchestras is pretty competitive, so for the two of us both to get through the audition process as the winner in the same orchestra is pretty unusual, so we're very, very grateful.
It's not like you had an edge because you're Charlie's brother.
Nope, not at all. Not at all. And most orchestras, the first couple of rounds of auditions that you play are behind a screen, so they don't know who you are anyway. So.
And that final round, I'm always curious about the final round when there's no screen and everybody can see you. And you also work a lot in that final round with the section that may be your coworkers, so the principal and second trumpeter. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm always endlessly fascinated with the audition process.
Sure. It is very common in woodwind, maybe, I don't know about woodwind, but definitely in brass auditions to have either a separate section round or you might have this as part of the final round. So for me, my final round here, I played 8 or 9 brief solo excerpts, and then the other 2 trumpeters, Jeff Work and Dave Bamonte, came on stage and joined me up in the back row where we actually sit. And we played through another 5 or 6 pieces in various combinations of the 3 of us, just to get a feel for how we'd get along as a section sonically and as well as at least a little bit personally.
And did you know either of them before that last round?
I did, just as acquaintances. I was actually a finalist for the job I now have here in 2008. And my predecessor, Micah Wilkinson, is a great friend of mine, and he got the job back in 2008. I'm glad he did. He was more ready for that than I was at that time. So I knew them from that experience of playing on stage with them at the audition. And then I also played a week of concerts with the Oregon Symphony a few years ago as an extra. They were doing the Janacek Sinfonietta, which originally calls for 12 trumpets. And we were doing a reduced version that only called for 6. So I got a call to come up and play that. So I got to know them a little bit during that week as well.
So that final round maybe wasn't as nerve-wracking as it could have been because you had a little bit of prior experience.
Definitely, yeah. And they're Jeff and Dave are both just sweethearts, and anyone who comes into their section is instantly welcomed, and there's a great sense of camaraderie. So just kind of knowing that in advance put me at ease, absolutely.
That word you just said, camaraderie, it strikes me as something that applies orchestra-wide. But, I'm a brass player myself, and I can see it, I can sense it among that back row from the horns all the way through the tuba. Am I sensing correctly that you guys are all friendly and get along? And
Yeah, it's very true, and it's not necessarily always that way. As you can imagine, you put any 70 people on the same stage day after day, year after year, you're going to have some people get along better than others. But I have to say that, and this is not just because I'm speaking as a representative of the orchestra, but the camaraderie here is actually quite exceptional. And just the working atmosphere on a daily basis is very congenial. People are definitely dedicated to making the best possible sounds, but they're also interested in making sure that everyone's having a good time.
So how does that manifest itself? I mean, I've been in orchestras where it's kind of a very competitive atmosphere. Like if you miss a note, people make you not feel bad, but it's definitely not a supportive environment. Like how does that work here?
Right. Well, it's very supportive here, and there's something revealing in the way that people react when they make a mistake on stage. And you'll see in various orchestras, you might even see someone make a mistake and they go, "Oh no, I missed a note." You can almost sense the frustration. And of course, we always love to play our best here, but we also understand that this is live music, and there's no such thing as a perfect performance. And what I take from this orchestra is that those mistakes are going to happen, but as long as you're making the best possible musical phrase you can, it's going to be okay.
So if you happen to miss a note, it's not like your principal trumpeter, Jeff Work, is going to go and flog you afterwards. Or does he?
He hasn't yet, so I think I'm safe.
I want to go back to where you were before you took this audition and landed in this very welcoming orchestra. You were in New Orleans with the Louisiana Philharmonic for how many years?
5.5 years.
And 5.5 years. So that was post-Katrina.
Yes.
Can you talk about living there at that time and what the orchestra was like and your involvement and what it was like just to live in that city?
Absolutely. So I joined the orchestra in the fall of 2009, which was almost exactly 4 years after Hurricane Katrina. And I'd never been to New Orleans until I auditioned there a couple months prior to that. So I didn't really know what to expect. All I knew was, hey, they told me I got the job, so I guess I'll go. And it was an incredible time to be there because the population of New Orleans was still much smaller than it was pre-Katrina. So there was a sense of quiet and sort of calm about it, but people were rebuilding, restaurants and venues were coming back to life, and it was kind of a fertile time to be there. And the music director there, Carlos Miguel Prieto, to his credit, he was to begin his music directorship in September of 2005, and it was August 29th, 2005, that Hurricane Katrina hit. And I can imagine many music directors in that situation would have said, "You know what? Thanks for the offer, but I'm going to try to find some work elsewhere." He didn't. He stuck with it, and he stayed in New Orleans, and he helped rebuild the musical community around that orchestra, and he's been a major contributor to that scene ever since.
And you said you were the associate principal there?
That's right.
Which means that you would often play the principal part, but also what?
Right. So the way it was set up there, we had a principal trumpet, second trumpet, and then I was third/assistant principal. And basically what that means is a lot of the times I was playing third trumpet. If there were 3 trumpet parts, I'd be playing third. If there were 2 trumpet parts, I would either not be playing or I would be playing principal so that the principal player could rotate out and take a break. So I would often play principal on pieces on the first half, usually piano concertos, things like that.
And so you were there for 5 years, and what makes you pull up and leave New Orleans for Oregon? Is it your brother playing bass trombone? What was it?
Well, that certainly helped. I had a little extra motivation from my family. I have a wife who's here, Claire. Hi, Claire. I love to make her nervous. And I have 2 adorable stepkids with her, and we wanted to move to a place where we could get a little bit better salaries for ourselves and just better schools for the kids as well. And so those were definitely motivating factors, as well as just the renown of this orchestra and my positive experiences of working here and having my brother here.
Well, and it must have been a tough decision, too, because you mentioned briefly your interest in jazz as a kid. You and Charlie would listen to jazz together. And New Orleans, my God, what a jazz town, you know? And I would assume that you were involved in that community as well as the classical community?
I was. And this was sort of another lifelong dream, was to be in a situation where I could play in an orchestra full time, which is really one of the things I love to do. But to be in a position where I could also do jazz gigs on the side when possible. And as it turned out, after being there for a few years, I got a phone call out of the blue one day. This guy says his name is Russell, and he calls me up and he says, "Hey, we've got a Dixieland band, and our trumpet player left town. We need a new trumpet player. You know, are you free these dates to do a wedding ceremony and second line parade and wedding reception?"
Second line is like those parades down the...
So a second line parade
Thanks for clearing that up.
is a New Orleans tradition birthed out of funerals. So you would have the procession out of the funeral, and then you'd have the second line, which was like the band, and they would start off playing a slow dirge, you know, Just a Closer Walk with Thee or something like that, you know, to really embrace the solemnity of the occasion. And then they'd break out into double-time Dixieland jazz, and everyone would party, and you'd have people with parasols waving white handkerchiefs, and it turns into a party. I mean, that's, you know, if nothing else, New Orleans knows how to throw a good party. So that's where the second line thing came from. And so to this day, when people have funerals and weddings in New Orleans, they'll often hire a band to do a second line. So this guy calls me up and says, we want to have you come play with a band. And I was like, okay, I'm free. The money seems good. Sure, why not? And turns out this guy is a pediatric infectious disease doctor named Dr. Russell Steele, and the band was called Dr. Jazz and the Dixieland Sounds. And so I ended up playing with this band on a regular basis for the next 3 years, and it was a blast, and I got to learn all these New Orleans Dixieland tunes that I'd grown up listening to but not really knowing how to do. So that was a terrific experience.
Wow. So is it fair to say you were as involved in the jazz scene in New Orleans as you were in the classical? Was there more other jazz too?
Probably mostly orchestra work, but I did gigs with the jazz band as much as I could. Also, when I moved to town, I managed to get in touch with Jeremy Davenport, who was a former trumpet player with the Harry Connick Jr. Big Band, who now has his own lounge at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in New Orleans on Canal Street. And I would go hang out with him and sit in with his band very often when I first moved there, and we've remained close friends. And getting to play with someone of his caliber, with a band of his caliber, was a really terrific experience. There's another Harry Connick alum named Leroy Jones, another phenomenal trumpet player who was kind enough to let me sit in on some of his jobs from time to time. And just to be around players like that and then go to work the next day and play Mozart symphonies, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, what great balance. And I'm going to ask you a question that's kind of hard to answer, but as a working musician, what does playing jazz give you that playing classical doesn't, or vice versa? I mean, how does it work on your brain or your heart?
Well, I've been playing jazz as long as I've been playing the trumpet, so it's something that's always been very, very important to me. And the ratio of classical to jazz that I've had in my life at any given time is, it shifts. But it's a different form of expression. Certainly the obvious thing to say would be that it engenders more creativity, more spontaneity, being able to improvise. It's just a lot of fun. It's kind of like solving puzzles to figure out how to improvise and stay in the changes, but still try to say something meaningful with what you're doing.
Yeah, improvising. I've heard so many classical instructors give advice to classical musicians, like learn to improvise, but it's so easy as a classical musician just to read the notes on the page, right?
It is easy to do that. But I would argue that, and I've said this many times, but I would argue that any classical musician, really any musician, period, should learn to improvise on some level. Even if it's just 10 minutes a day in the privacy and security of your own practice room where no one else can hear you. Just to do it, because it forces you to use your ears to find melody, phrasing, harmony, rhythm. It forces you to be creative. And in my own practicing, I do a lot of improvising based on whatever classical etudes I'm working on or exercises. And as a teacher, I've found it useful as well to try to inform my students. When you have a particular problem that you're working on in a piece of music, you have to create exercises that will help you solve that problem. So to me, that's the creativity of being a classical musician, is improvising to find solutions to various problems that you have.
You clearly speak passionately about jazz, and it makes me wonder, was there a point in your life where you thought about pursuing that as a career instead of classical music as a career?
Early on, absolutely, especially middle school and I'd say on into high school a good bit. The big life dream at that point was to play with Wynton Marsalis in the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. So not quite there yet, but certainly at that age, that was the dream.
And I imagine your life would be a whole lot different if you were a jazz musician rather than a classical musician. I mean, you mentioned you've got a wife and stepkids, like nice predictable job here, right? Rehearsal schedule.
Yes.
And
yeah, I know when everything's going to happen here, and I know at what time I get to go home. So that's definitely nice. I don't know if family aside, I'm not sure I would have really loved being out at jazz clubs till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning every night. I don't think I loved it enough to do that for a long period of time. And if you're going to be a jazz musician, you have to also kind of be an entrepreneur, and I also just wasn't really comfortable with that. So those things kind of combined, and my love of the orchestral repertoire, it wasn't a difficult decision to head more that direction.
well, we mentioned you've only been in Oregon since January. So have you had time to explore the jazz? Are you interested in playing jazz here in Portland?
I certainly am. If anybody knows anyone who needs a jazz trumpet player, you can find my information on the website. I am interested in doing that more. At this point, I'm really concentrating on my work with the Oregon Symphony. But as I said, it's playing jazz and other styles of music is something that's always been important to me. So if I can do more of that in the future, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to keep doing that stuff.
I'm kind of curious. You mentioned you grew up in a musical family. Your brother, Charlie, is musical. Your parents are musical. Are you raising your kids to be musical too? How does that work? Do you pass that on? Do you feel obligated?
I don't so much feel obligated, but the kids love playing my trumpets, and they've gotten some pretty impressive noises out of them. And they especially like the piccolo trumpet because it's about half the size of the regular trumpets that we normally play, so they can actually get both hands on it and hold it themselves. It's pretty funny. And don't tell the kids, but we're gonna get one of them a P-bone for Christmas.
Oh, is that the plastic trombone?
Yeah, plastic alto trombone.
Aw. Your brother takes that into the wilderness with him, he told me, when he goes camping.
That's right. That's how we found out about it. Uncle Charlie let the kids borrow the P-bone for a week once, and our 5-year-old Max was all over it. Every morning he'd wake up and say, "Can I play the trombone?"
Aw.
Yeah, it was pretty cute.
That is so sweet.
Yeah.
Talking about your brother again, you're playing music all through your adolescence and teenage years. Did he give you any pearls of wisdom, any words of advice? Or vice versa, as a younger brother to an older brother, did you set him straight now and then? How was that relationship?
Probably mostly him giving me advice, as you might expect. I always cite all the members of my family as some of my most significant early musical influences. Of course, just being around them all the time. I mean, we just talked about music at the dinner table. That's what we did. And certainly, over the years, Charlie's given me many great pieces of advice about playing, about how to do a good job, how to prepare for auditions, things like that. In fact, even about a week before I came to take the audition here last year, I was having trouble with one particular thing, and so I called him up and I said, "Hey, Charlie, how do you do this?" And he gave me some little tips for how to work on the problem I was dealing with, and it was just one more thing that I think helped me prepare to play my best when I got here. So from beginning to now, he's always been able to help me through a lot.
Having interviewed Doug's brother, Charlie Reneau, in one of these pre-concert chats before, I see some similarities in you. I think you're both very, I don't want to say serious, because you both have great senses of humor, but you're very matter-of-fact, maybe that's the right word, and focused and responsible. Maybe you can think of other ways in which you're similar, and I'm curious about ways in which you're very different, too.
Well, that must be that Midwestern upbringing. We are similar in some ways. I think we think musically. I think we have a very similar sensibility. I think we both value the same kinds of things in a musical performance, and I think we both find ourselves striving for the same musical goals. As far as different, well, I still have more hair than he does, so that's good, right? Other than that, I don't know.
I don't know what question to ask you to follow that up. Oh my gosh, that's great. What's been your favorite thing so far about joining the orchestra, having your brother in this section?
Too many to count. The level of this orchestra is really quite something, and the consistency that the performers around me exhibit in rehearsal and performance it's really inspiring. So making sure that I'm on top of my game to keep up with these incredible colleagues has been great fun. Also, I have to say, working with Maestro Carlos Calmar has been a real treat. He's one of the most detail-oriented and prepared conductors I have ever experienced. I mean, from the downbeat of the first rehearsal, he knows exactly what needs to happen, and he gets it done. And by the end of the rehearsal cycle, everyone has a really clear idea of what needs to happen. And it's great, because then you walk out on stage and you don't have to wonder what's going to happen. You know what he's going for, and you can trust the colleagues around you to help you achieve that artistic vision.
I am so impressed with you. Thank you for doing this pre-concert chat with me.
Thank you, Christa. It's been a pleasure.
This is Doug Reneau. He's playing only tonight on Ludoslavsky, the first piece in the program, and then he's going to join Claire up in the audience, right, to listen to the orchestra for the rest of the... So thank you for doing this with me. And if you have any trumpeters in your life that you'd want to listen to Doug and I'm in our chat, this very chat will be archived on the All Classical Portland website, and you can access it at allclassical.org. I'm Christa Wessel. That's Doug Reneau. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.